that issue can be found on. So, for example, the first one, it says parens 4. The next one, 41 to 43, are generally the pages in the bill where you can find it. We're going to go through it. If you have questions, we don't want to debate it today, but we want clarity so we know what's in front of us. We will be taking it up at the end of next week, and we'll take up amendments and voting. Whether tomorrow we will probably, along with the voting list, add this on, and there will be a hold, so the hold will be out of the way, and either next Thursday or Friday, we'll be taking the bill up. No.
No, I don't know if you want to say that.
No. So we're taking questions from you all as we go through, and she's just going to keep moving unless you've got questions. I think we'll spend more time on newer sections of the bill, particularly if the same things were done last year, but obviously feel free to ask about anything in the bill. Questions? And for those watching, we're talking about Senate Bill 528, the Climate Solutions Now Act, and we are streaming, correct? Ms. Morton, you're on.
All right. So the plan here is to basically take the bill kind of front to back, although we're going to have to jump around a little bit in some places just because there are some sections that sort of hang together that are in different parts of the bill. But we'll start on page 4, lines 29 through 31. This just establishes a goal of achieving net zero statewide greenhouse gas emissions by 2045. That's same provision from last year's bill. Just note that this provision sunsets June 30th, 2026. So the General Assembly would have to come back and look at that goal and reauthorize it if that's was what they wanted to do.
I don't want to skip over that. I mean, that's an important point. So while this is what we're putting in law, that section of law will sunset unless it's reauthorized by the legislature. This happened on the very first climate bill. It had to be reauthorized. It was reauthorized, and in fact, when the reauthorization came, they actually increased the goal.
Exact date in 20?
June 30th, 2026.
And that's on the next page.
And Mr. Chairman, that'll be the final
in the
year of
last
the 4-year term.
I guess. Is that right? I don't know.
23, 24, 25, 26? So they'll have in the 4th year of that term, January 23, 24, 25, 26, and then it's June.
Okay, so the
And
year
that's
before,
a good
year
thing.
before, we'll have to work on it.
Yeah.
Yep. And so if you look on page 52, line 17 to 20, that's what Ms. Morton is referring to. Sunset language is uncodified. The very last page of the page 52 of the full document, line 17, is the sunset language. Thank you.
For that goal.
Yes.
So, picking that date, I'm imagining there's going to have to be some adjustment in departments for purchases, for building substations and all that. Is that why you picked 4 years out? In other words, are you trying to say it's working or it's not working? Because I imagine a lot of things are going to be in place by 2026 that you can't, a lot of investment will be made by that point. Is this the appropriate time, or should it be moved up more before you make big decisions to put a substation or things like that? I mean, 4 years down the road, they've done all this, and then it's just say, for argument's sake, something's not working, and you put all this money into it, 4 years into it, and now you're evaluating it.
Well, some people feel we shouldn't have any sunset. We should make the goal and just go full-fledged ahead. It's been suggested we have a sunset, which we can revisit.
I'm just going to the purpose of the sunset.
Well, that's a great question. Personally, I don't want people to wait. and not do anything for the next 4 or 5 years. So maybe it's actually too early. I don't know. We wanted to bring it back to the legislature at some point. So, but we can have that debate later on when on amendments. On that, Senator,
On the sunset issue, so section 5 has to do with education, and that sunsets in 7 years. Okay, so on the last page.
no,
It's, line 21 says that's section 5 of this act.
well, let's come back with each section.
I'm sorry, it was, line 11. Section 5 of this act shall take effect June 22 and be in effect for 7 years, which is section 5.
Let,
get there.
Okay,
I only referred to this because
all right.
we just talked about section 3. And they aren't set in stone either. Let's keep going.
All right. So next big section is beginning on page 5. This is new from last year. This section establishes the Climate Capital Fund. Some advocates have been referring to it as the C3 fund, administered by the Maryland Clean Energy Center. This fund would essentially function as a green bank to finance climate-related projects. And you can see the specific purposes for which those projects could be, or for which funds could be used, on page 5, line 17, through page 6, line 7. The bill establishes a mandatory appropriation of $5 million for the fund in fiscal years 24, 25, and 26. And so the idea is that that money would capitalize the fund, and then because this would be functioning as a green bank, loans would be made out of the fund, and loan repayments would be coming back into that fund. This is to finance both public and private projects.
And I'm just going to jump in. This Clean Energy Center has been in place 15-plus years, set up by the government to be a central location. They have told us that they could multiply the investment in clean energy 5 or 10 times for every dollar the state puts in. So, Senator,
Where is the 5 million?
So the
page
5
7, line 24.
So you said it's for public and private, and I apologize, I haven't read the whole bill yet. So would this address some of the things that like BGE came in, some of the costs that they may incur, and then like the propane people or the people building the housing or retrofit? I mean,
retrofits, yes. So right now, this is the Maryland Clean Energy Center. So right now, they run like the PACER program, which we've had some bills on that in the past. But basically, they provide sort of these low-interest loans that then can be paid back. This would sort of build off of the existing stuff that they're doing, again, to sort of finance projects to facilitate electrification, things like that.
and just real quickly, you said loans, and you also mentioned grants. Is it they could do either? They could give them basically grants to pay for it, or they would also set up loans to have them pay back with low interest?
My understanding is this is primarily for loans rather than for grants.
Okay. All right, thank you.
If we just have just questions, because there's we can just ask.
Please.
So I just want to go back, the Maryland Clean Energy Center, I'm sorry, what is that? Where is that? So I'm on page 5, line 4.
This is a body that's been in the state. It's a quasi-public-private set up by the state. They've been around probably 15 years. They are a center for bringing together companies that want to invest in clean energy.
Okay.
So most of them are private, developing new technology. They might own solar panel companies. They might be wind groups. And so it's, I don't want to say it's, what do you call those?
Are they, is this appointed by the governor, or is it its own separate, is it a government, yeah, what kind of
Yeah,
entity?
it's
And
managed.
where is it in code?
So it's In code, it would be sort of, it's right around, what is it? It's Title 2, Subtitle 12 of the Environment.
Right.
No, sorry, it's Title 10, Subtitle 8 of the Economic Development article. It's sort of, I believe it's actually sort of housed in the University of Maryland somehow. But it's managed by a board of directors who are appointed by the governor. And primarily what they do, actually, it's more loans to homeowners and businesses. Right now, that's primarily what they're doing for efficiency upgrades.
Okay, thank you.
Geothermal, would that be included in this, what all's
Yeah.
covered under there?
Yeah, if you look on page 5, just take a minute to look 1 through 8,
Yeah.
and that'll give you a sense, just,
Yeah, and then in,
hold, Senator.
What about carbon capture?
It's not prohibited, so it'd be up to the center to sort of kind of make those decisions about eligible projects. But, presumably if it kind of meets those, falls within those categories under there, it's not prohibited.
Okay.
I'm sorry, back to you, Senator.
thanks. So we have our climate catalytic capital fund, and so we're establishing it, and it has 2 primary purposes. One is to promote environmental justice, and the other is to leverage increased private capital, right? I'm not as good on the finance side of things. What is that? What would that be? What would that look like? Is that just that's a general thing, and that each of these 5 bullet points
8,
are how?
actually. There are 3 more on the next page.
Right, 8. Okay, cool.
Again, loaning money for cutting-edge clean energy technology, green bond programs, energy efficiency and management, electrification.
And what's what's a green bond program? Are we creating, is there such a thing as a green bond program, or are we creating a green bond program? Well, that's on that would be lines 6 and 7 on page 6.
We'll get back, the executive director, they actually have a conference in Annapolis today.
Okay,
They had 200 people at the Calvert House.
okay,
The executive director is Kathy Magruder. She testified actually the other day. I don't have an answer to that, but we can find out
okay.
and get
We're
back.
not creating, green bonds already exist.
Okay, and they exist where? Like,
There are many types.
so so the bank that we would be creating would be issuing these bonds?
I don't think.
We will have to get back to you.
Okay,
I don't want to give you false information.
right, that's just some technical stuff and then the final part of the question, just in this section, just so we can answer them all together, is that the center then, so that's this Maryland Clean Energy Center, is establishing an oversight committee. And the board, I just want to understand, yeah, the board of directors of the center is appointing a fund oversight committee. Is there anywhere in code about how those appointments happen and what the representation of those appointments are? These are questions to think about.
Those are my questions too.
Yeah,
Who appoints how many, how diverse geographically?
because it could ideally be a lot of money.
Okay.
And if not, and then there's interesting, number 3 talks about the sale and disposition of financing. So I'd be interested in what that looks like. That's number 3, line 15, about the fund, its uses. And then number 6 has to do with the proceeds of the sale of financing or assets. So again, just ideas about what's contemplated there, given that the purpose is promoting environmental justice and leveraging private capital. So that's all, I'm just trying to, so there's the administration of the fund, which I get, which is C, and what the fund consists of, but that's all a part of its purpose, well, and it's connected to its purpose. So I just would like to know how they all fit together.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. So I had the same questions, Senator Washington, on page 6, lines 9 through 10. So I'll just go to my next one, which is, I know this is somewhat boilerplate language on page 6, lines 23, 24. I'm wondering, since the bill, and I know that this could change, only includes ultimately 15 million over fiscal years 24, 25, 26. I'm wondering about the fundraising, and I'm wondering whether there would be transparency, disclosure, any limitations on source, and what sort of, possible conflicts of interest or influence perspective, perception or something. So do we have a need to clarify that, or is that so boilerplate that it's not needed? And maybe Senator Lamb might have concepts on that as some of the work that he does on our oversight, audit committee.
I don't have an answer. All I can tell you is that would be money contributed to this bank to be loaned out.
Right,
Right. And it calls for an audit of all funds.
I see that. And it doesn't say how often.
Okay.
Okay. So the next provision, we're going to skip over for now, the bottom of page 7 through top of page 9, the education, but we're going to come back to that, but it makes more sense to discuss in the context of the other building provisions. So we'll come back to that. Senator Carrozza has a question.
Senator?
Before we go into detail in the next section, and following up on Senator Washington's question, I'm just trying to understand how you've got the center, you've got the fund, you've got 8 different ways, I guess, the fund can be used. So how does this work in reality? Like if you're a local jurisdiction, if you're a local nonprofit, or I'm just trying to figure out how we envision this fund, center, and different purposes of projects, how it works in reality.
My understanding, and I wish we had Ms. Magruder here, but she's hosting 200 clean energy technocrats at the Calvert House, is this body, the oversight body is appointed by the governor. I don't know how many were appointed by the current governor or previous governor. They have a very small staff. Ms. Magruder, that tries to get more companies to invest and create jobs in the state, and there might be a couple of other people. Entities that want to do these 8 things would apply for loans from the bank, I assume, to supplement their own investment that would promote private capital investment for addressing those things as well as environmental justice. And they would judge which ones best fit the criteria. And I assume they'd look at how stable they were and what kind of results they would get. I mean, it's like I don't want to call it an incubator, but I think it's to encourage more companies to invest in these 8 purposes. They're like a bank. It's a public bank with a very singular purpose. I don't know how best to describe it beyond that.
They got a great website.
MCEC? Oh, yeah, they've been around for years.
So I would encourage people to go to Maryland Clean Energy Center.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, so the next part that we're going to jump to is middle of page 9. This is the start of the section dealing with environmental justice and the Commission on Environmental Justice and Sustainable Communities. The first thing this does is it specifies, this is the bottom of page 9, that the staffing responsibilities of the Maryland Department of the Environment include conducting research and gathering data at the direction of the Environmental Justice Commission. On the next page, requires the Environmental Justice Commission to coordinate with the Department of the Environment on the adoption of a methodology for identifying communities disproportionately affected by climate change, the development of specific strategies to address environmental justice concerns, reduce greenhouse gas emissions and co-pollutants, and build climate equity and resilience. And finally, the establishment of goals for the percentage of state funding for greenhouse gas emissions that should go to communities disproportionately affected by climate change. So that's page 10, lines 13 through 24. The next part, so that's pretty similar to what was in last year's bill. The next part is also pretty similar. This is the start of page 11, but it requires the Department of the Environment, in consultation with the Commission, to take specific actions related to climate justice on or before December 31st, 2023, including adopting that methodology that was just discussed, developing specific strategies to address environmental justice concerns, and establishing goals for the percentage of state funding that should go to disproportionately affected communities. The key difference between that section in this year's bill versus last year's bill is that this year's bill puts the onus on the Department of the Environment in consultation with the Commission, rather than putting the onus on the Commission in consultation with the Department.
If I could, in that section, thank you for that. Are there, okay, I'm going to go back to page 10, lines 15 through 20. It's the adoption of the methodology identifying communities and the adoption of specific strategies. The Environmental Justice Commission is coordinating with the department. What does that mean, I guess? I'm wondering.
You know, one of the members of the Environmental Justice Commission,
Yeah.
and I know Senator Patter sits on it too, Delegate Boyce, she sits on it, and when she first read this, she was nervous that she didn't think the commission itself, the members, had the capacity.
Right.
And so we wanted to make it very clear that Department of Environment that staffed it was going to staff it. In other words, that this was something the commission could direct the Department of the Environment to do the legwork. So we tried to come up with language that would make that clear. I mean, we didn't want to step on the toes of the Climate Commission. It's a freestanding body. We had a bill last year, I don't know if it was Senator Patterson, someone, to change some things on the Environmental Justice Commission. She thought we should be a little clearer, because I think there was some concern that it would be a very heavy lift for the members who are senators and delegates,
Right.
but to make clear that MDE worked for them and was going to have to staff it and do the research and do a lot of this work, and then bring it back to them, because at the policy level, that's why we have the Environmental Justice Commission. So that was the intent.
Okay.
If it's not in the right frame, the
Yeah.
committee, it's in our hands, so we can change it. So
Yeah, I would be interested in that, because I tried to find if there was an appropriation associated with staffing, because that would actually be a lot of work, and that there should probably be, a couple of people that are dedicated to that coordination. And then also, when I look at the Energy Center, it's not clear to me its capacity or experience with environmental justice, and since they're the fund holder, it would be important, I think, to have that collaboration. So, Chair, I'd like to, I look at the board and it just, So, I'd like to work to make that clear, because coordinating without staff and funding I don't know that it'll achieve the goal that we're trying to,
Well, I can tell you, the Climate Commission
yeah,
is staffed by the Department of Environment.
okay,
And I don't think they understand they have to staff it, and they have a multi-million-dollar budget,
Right.
and they use their staff to budget, to staff it. And they've used significant resources to do it. I think the Environmental Justice Commission will be in the same posture, essentially.
so they'll be able to get, they'll be able to draw on staff at MDE?
Yeah,
Okay,
And I will also add, so the language you're looking at right now on page 10, so that's just sort of building into the Environmental Justice Commission's sort of
Yeah.
responsibilities, but
Yeah.
the more operative language is actually on page 11. So this is the part that specifically requires it's the Department of the Environment must do this in consultation with the Environmental Justice Commission. They must develop specific strategies to address environmental justice concerns. They must adopt a methodology for identifying communities disproportionately affected by climate change. So it is on the department to do this stuff, again, in consultation with the Environmental Justice Commission, which they do already staff. I think there has been a question about the level of kind of resources they're really dedicating to that, but this would require the department to do these things.
and just to put a final small point to it, even this year, we have numbers of bills floating around the legislature talking about environmental justice. And I think the purpose here is to approach this in a systematic way, where they come in with 2 or 5 or 10 or 20 strategies to bring back to the legislature for us to pass as a package to do this
I see.
right. So the concern was we do it piecemeal, we might be doing slipshod and not taking a macro view. I think I had Senator Carrozza followed by Senator Simon Ayer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is more of a general question. I'm not sure where to find it in the bill, but I was looking at the summary when we were talking about the Environmental Justice Commission, and it says to adopt a methodology to identify communities disproportionately impacted by climate change. Does that also include geographic?
Definition, so in evaluating methodologies, so this is page 11, beginning on line 15. So they would have to consider geographic, public health, environmental hazard, and socioeconomic criteria, including areas burdened by cumulative environmental pollutants and other hazards, and areas with high concentrations of people experiencing poverty, high unemployment rates, high rent burdens, low levels of home ownership, et cetera, and populations that have historically experienced discrimination on the basis of race or ethnicity, as well as areas that are vulnerable to the impact of climate change, such as flooding, storm surges, and urban heat island effects due to low levels of tree coverage, high levels of impervious surfaces, or other factors. This is on page 11, lines 15 through 29. And a lot of this stuff is, and the reason why that language, identify a methodology, was sort of workshopped last year with the Commission on Environmental Justice, because there are already tools that exist out there for doing this kind of work. One of the most kind of commonly used ones in the state it's Maryland EJ Screen. You can find it on the Department of the Environment's website. So it's just sort of a question of sort of drilling down into the use of that tool or a similar tool to sort of identify these communities.
Yeah, Senator, if I can read between the lines, Senator, Somerset County, if they have the poverty, they have the cumulative impacts and these things, they absolutely would also be considered. It's to use objective criteria, and there's been a model that even I think the EPA is starting to use, developed by Jacoby Wilson, a professor at University of Maryland.
It tends to not be countywide. It tends to be sort of more on a census kind of basis. So within a county, there will likely be environmental justice sort of hot spots that a methodology like this could.
Yeah, I
identify.
understand that, and I would assume Somerset County would clearly fall in this, but I also was thinking the other geographic areas that may not fall under that. So that's why I was looking at the criteria of the geographic.
Well, there are multiple criteria, so this can be done in an objective way, is, you know.
Okay.
Senator Simon Ayer.
Just a quick 30,000-foot question. So does this bill, primarily in this section, just set up the framework of setting goals and strategies? It doesn't allocate money, and so that would come in future?
They would, our hope is that the environmental justice directing MDE to develop all these things, the methodology, the hotspots, where there's been disinvestment, where they need more investment, they would come up with a list of strategies and hopefully in a year, 2 year, 3 years, come up with the legislation saying the state now has to start doing X or Y or investing resources, and they would bring that back to the legislature.
Well, so I will note, page 11, lines 8 through 11, it does require the Department of the Environment to set appropriate goals for the percentage of state funding for greenhouse gas emission reduction measures that should be used for the benefit of disproportionately affected communities. I mean, that's pretty soft language there, and there is language later in the bill that actually requires the Commission on Climate Change to start reporting, because right now we don't really have a baseline. So once they identify that methodology, set some goals, and then have the department start reporting on the percentage of state funding that is currently going to those communities, again, with the idea, I think, later that things could be adjusted.
With the funding, do they have money allocated now, and they're trying to set the percentages of that money, or this just saying, come up, say we need 10% or 15% of a future fund?
So it's, and again, that's sort of what there's not a clear baseline on now, but that would be part of what they would start to be required to report, is how much money is the state spending each year on sort of climate-related initiatives. So right now, we have some of that kind of piecemeal because a lot of that comes from Strategic Energy Investment Fund, but it's also coming from other sources, and so this would require them to sort of report that on a yearly basis.
Okay, so if they were
The
doing
answer
like
is
a.
we don't know right now
Sure.
how much the state or MDE is spending on climate concerns. And they will say, oh, it bleeds into this category, it bleeds into this category. It says, why don't we start thinking about this? Find out how much we are spending, and then make recommendations to the kind of money we need to spend in these communities.
Okay.
Okay, next.
Okay, next, page 12, methane monitoring and regulation provisions. So page 12, lines 3 through 24, this is identical to what was in last year's bill. It deals with how methane emissions are measured. It says that if methane emissions data acquired from aircraft observation where available exceeds ground level emissions data by more than 25% for municipal solid waste landfills, then the department must require the landfill operator to investigate the difference, reassess the methodology and equipment they're using to obtain the ground level data, and then either take steps necessary to improve the accuracy of their ground level data or explain the scientific basis for believing that the ground level data is accurate. It also requires the department to publicly disclose methane emissions data on its website.
I just want to repeat, I think I heard you say that this was identical to last year's bill that we passed?
So that piece, yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
So the next piece, starting on page 12, line 25, this is new. So this would require the department on or before January 1st, 2024, to adopt regulations establishing surface methane emission standards for municipal solid waste landfills that are at least as stringent as regulations adopted by California.
Senator Carozza.
Just to go back to, I understand the municipal solid waste landfill that is required to monitor and report methane emissions to the department. I understand what you're saying is that it was in last year's bill. What I don't know is what is required now? Like, when it says it applies only to a municipal solid waste landfill that is required to monitor and report methane emissions. How many are there now, or what? I was just trying to understand. I understand it was in last year's bill, but I'm also trying to understand where that impacts.
So I don't know how many are currently subject to those requirements, but some proportion of municipal solid waste landfills are required to monitor and report their emissions, methane emissions, to the department. The question has been about the accuracy of those readings, and there have been aircraft observations that have shown much higher concentrations in the area of these landfills. So again, it's just the ones that are currently required to monitor and report that data would, under this, be required to take certain actions if the aircraft observations are wildly different from, or substantially different from what the on-ground readings
Okay, I
are
understand.
saying.
So there's X number of municipal landfills that are required to do this. We don't know how many that is. And if only those, then now they would be captured by this.
Correct.
That part, the regulatory program potentially could have a broader application, and that part I'm not sure. The new part, I'm not sure about.
Senator Patterson, Senator Hester, Senator Simon there.
Hey, but I just want to make sure, you said from line 4 through 24 on page 12 is identical to last year's write-up? I didn't see this last year because I made several inquiries about landfills. Could you tell me I guess that's too much to ask, but.
No, the Senator, it was virtually the same language. And it actually arose from my understanding that the University of
Wilson?
University of Maryland did flyover. They started doing
Right.
flyovers with federal
Right.
money. Airplanes, I know one person, one of the professors,
Right.
who's an atmospheric expert, and they started to have conversations. Their readings, they actually take pictures. You can see the red plume of methane coming up. They crossed their readings with the Brown Station Road landfill, and the numbers at the landfill with the handheld things were much, much lower. And so discussions started between the Secretary of the Environment, the head of Environmental Services for Prince George's County, and the University of Maryland to say, what's going on here? And they started to do flyovers in Baltimore County. I think there are a couple landfills. So it was brought to my attention, this is a problem because methane is like 50 to 80 times worse than carbon dioxide. And it also has implication for environmental justice of whose air is all this going into. So we put this in last year to say, let's get the numbers right. And that's what it does. And I spoke to the woman who testified from Prince George's County. She said, well, it's probably higher than what we're showing,
Right.
but not as high as what's in the airplane.
Wasn't there some discrepancy in terms of the overall numbers, in terms of how the survey, how it was counted or something like that?
That's
And it was-
exactly what this
and that
does
was-
with the most sophisticated technology that we can. Now, she makes the point, and I don't want to get too technical because it's over my head.
Yeah.
I didn't do that well in science. She says, look, the higher you go, you're also counting someone else's methane release. Now, I don't know how many feet the airplane runs, but the equipment is more sophisticated in this airplane than whatever they hold on the ground at the landfill. So we want to get to a point that we can assess how much of this dangerous stuff's being released into the air and the atmosphere in our state. So that's, and this was pretty close to the same language last year, except the new section in lines 26 to 30, that's new.
Okay,
I had Senator Hester next.
okay.
I was just curious, picking up on Senator Cruz's question about the fact that only municipal solid waste landfills that are required to monitor and report. Could we just ask the department who's not required to monitor and report and why? Because why would we be penalizing the ones that are reporting and letting the ones who aren't reporting get off the hook?
I mean, we will look into it, but believe it might right now just be based off of size. You know, the bigger ones, I think, might be the ones required, but I can look into that.
Look, I'll make it expansive as we need. Already people gave them some heartburn. The ones run by the counties or whatever, I thought is the place to start. I mean, but I'm open on that question, obviously. Senator Simon.
Looks like from last year, that's just making sure we have proper measuring, that section. And so the new section is talking about new standards. And just basically, what is the effect of that? I'm assuming we have some standards, and if they don't meet those standards, they have to go back and fix it? No? So what's the impact of this?
Right,
There are two parts to it. One, they need to set acceptable standards of what can be released.
Right.
And that's part one. Part two, I am proffering they should use California. Is that the right number? I don't know. Some people have raised questions about that. We'll talk about it, and I'll be frank, I'm open to, we have to have the department come up with a measurement. Is California right? I'm not sure. But I think just to say, release whatever you want to release, if it's doing harm, and they can control it, because you can capture methane. There are technologies. So, and again, I don't know if it's going to be a Republican or a Democratic administration, the department has to get a little bit more aggressive in this. And they actually have a work group right now, they're working on this. But I don't want them to backslide.
So they basically don't have a standard now that if it's leaking what they say in the aircraft, they don't have to fix it?
Right.
That's current, okay. And then, I recall some Mako coming in and had some opposition to this, basically probably doesn't want to fix it because it's going to be expensive. Is that the basic?
What I heard, at least from our county, is they didn't have a problem with setting a standard, they don't like the California standard.
Okay, so Mako's basically okay
Well,
with setting a standard?
this was the environmental person, Prince George's County. I don't know what Mako said, but my guess is most counties will say the same thing. They don't want the California standard. It's too high a standard.
Okay, and then last thing on this. Is this something that there's technology that they can bring in and cap it or whatever, or would they, I don't even know what they would have to do would they have to completely close it or cap it? I mean.
I believe a lot of it is capping it or burning it off. There are ways that you can reduce the emissions, but
Thank you. I'm the landfill king of Anne Arundel County, so all I can tell you is, we capture the methane, and we use it to produce energy, and send it to Fort Meade.
Well, the ash, right? You were the ash.
Don't ask me.
Okay.
But they're burning it, so it's creating heat.
okay. So page 13, moving on. So this is the new emission reduction targets for planning purposes. Again, this is all basically identical to what was in last year's bill, except in some cases with a one-year sort of bump out for the development of plans, just because we're a year later. But establishes a new goal of reducing emissions by 60% instead of the current is 40% by 2030. Submit a proposed plan to meet that goal by June 30th, 2023, and a final plan by December 31st, 2023. This plan must set the state on a path for achieving net zero statewide greenhouse gas emissions by 2045. And then a final plan that achieves net zero emissions is due December 31st, 2030, with a revised plan due December 31st, 2035. And so there were questions earlier about that, sort of the sunsetting of the net zero by 2045. Some of that is to sort of align with this, because the final revised plan to achieve net zero would be due December 31st, 2035. That would give the General Assembly essentially one session to review that and sort of decide if that was feasible while they were making the decision on whether or not to extend that 2045 date, or net zero by 2045 goal. So basically, you'd have the plan in front of you, or the legislature would have the plan in front of them when they made that decision, so they could decide if it was feasible and economical. Page 14 through 16, this again is identical to last year's bill, just specifies provisions that the greenhouse gas reduction plans may and may not include. Finally, so that's all the planning stuff. Again, all of that is the same as last year. Pages 17 through 20.
Yeah.
So, page 14, line 12, it says, may include use of carbon capture. It says, has been scientifically proven to achieve verifiable. Who's measuring that? When it says scientifically proven, who's the arbiter of that?
Yeah, ultimately, the Department of the Environment, they're creating the plan.
Okay.
Okay, so moving along, pages 17 through 20. This again is identical to the provisions from last year's bill, establishing the Just Transition Employment and Retraining Working Group to advise the Maryland Commission on Climate Change on issues and opportunities for workforce development and training related to climate. Next part starts at the page 20, beginning at line 22. Again, identical to last year's bill. Requires the annual report prepared by the Maryland Commission on Climate Change to include information related to the amount of state money spent on measures to reduce greenhouse gases and co-pollutants, including the percentage of that funding spent in disproportionately affected communities. Developed according to that methodology adopted by the Department of the Environment. So that's, yeah, bottom of 20, beginning in line 22. Page 22, lines 12 through 15. This language actually appeared in the 2020 version of the climate bill, but not in the 2021 version. Requires each state agency, when conducting long-term planning, developing policy, and drafting regulations, to take into consideration the likely climate impacts of the agency's decision. So page 22, lines 12 through 15. Okay, so the next section has to do, this is a new section, establishes a requirement related to zero-emission school buses. So this is on page 22, starting line 23, and then going through most of the following page. So this section establishes, or says that beginning in fiscal year 2024, county boards of education may not enter into a new contract for the purchase or use of any school bus that is not a zero-emission vehicle unless the Department of the Environment determines that no available zero-emission vehicle meets the performance requirements for the county's use, or the county board is unable to obtain federal, state, or private funding sufficient to cover the incremental cost associated with contracting for the purchase or use of zero-emission vehicle school buses. So again, the idea is to say if there's a bus that suits the purpose and there's non-county money available, you would have to do it.
So let me just give a little context, if I could. The infrastructure bill that passed, not the Build Back Better, has, I want to say $5 billion, I can't remember the exact number, for the purpose of electrifying school buses. It's a grant program, and hopefully our 24 jurisdictions will apply for it. So I want to utilize that money. And if we can get that, look, there's a marginal difference on it. I mean, these are more expensive. It's different than a car. On a car, it might be $10,000. On a school bus, we're talking bigger numbers. So to utilize that federal money, if it's available and the buses are available, you got to do it. There's no excuses. Now, Montgomery County actually has already started on this, and I think one or two other counties are starting to do this on their own. I will say it was brought up about those bus companies that a local contracts with. And we're trying to come up with language because we don't want to put the burden on them. It's on the school system. So we got the letter from the group and the committee council. We're trying to figure out the language to do that. So we understand not every school system has their own buses. So we're trying to work that out. But if the money's available and the state can use it, they'll just build it into the contract with the company they utilize. So that's the genesis of this. And also, and it's been brought up, we had a long conversation with Professor Wilson, Jacoby Wilson, some of you might know him. And he says, look, in a lot of places, Prince George's County, a lot of places, it's these buses that emit all the stuff that, is contributed to asthma and things like that. And he actually thinks it's an environmental justice issue. So we think there are a lot of reasons to do this. So anyway, I think I had Senator Simon, either one, whoever.
Yes, if it could be possible to help with one big grant application. Like, because I know that the smaller the school systems are, the less personnel they have. And it would just be great if like MSDE could get a big grant and pass it all along.
Interestingly enough, I watched the federal government's webinar on this. They had like 1,000 people on it. And that was the first thing, and I think I shared with Ms. Morton, one of the questions I want to ask the feds, if the state could act as the broker for that. So they haven't promulgated regs yet. But I agree with you. It would be a hell of a lot easier.
I mean, I'm seeing that in cyber as well.
Senator. Okay, keep going.
So we're going to ignore the bottom of page 23 for now because this just defines terms that are going to be for sections discussed later in the bill. We'll jump to page 24, line 10. This starts a section, again, that is new to this year's bill, that establishes the Maryland Climate Justice Corps. Now, the Corps is modeled closely on the existing Chesapeake Conservation Corps, but is focused on providing opportunities to work on climate justice-related issues, particularly in communities disproportionately affected by climate change. The purposes, if you want to take a look, the purposes of the program are laid out on page 25, lines 13 through 25. Like the Conservation Corps, the climate...
Why don't we just give them a second? Why don't you, the bottom half of 25, just take a second to glance at that if you would. A little wait time. Okay, April. Senator, can we hold the question, let Ms. Morton go through it a little bit, and then we'll come back to your question? Okay.
So like the Conservation Corps, the Climate Justice Corps would be administered by the Chesapeake Bay Trust, but it would have a separate board responsible for selecting host organizations and placing young adults and students in core positions within those organizations. So the board membership is specified on page 26, lines 3 through 16. And then, so a lot of this, the additional provisions in this, I will say, are more or less boilerplate. But the next sort of, again, sort of more meaty provisions are on page 30, line 26 through page 31, line 16. This spells out in more detail the types of projects that Climate Justice Core Program participants could be engaged in.
So, Senator, let's just take a minute if we could. If we can look on 31B, just to give us a sense of what we're talking about.
And C.
I'm sorry?
B and C.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Just the top half of 31. Just take a second to glance through that if you would. I can either take Senator Washington or Senator Patterson, whatever order you folks want to go in. Senator Patterson.
Mr. Chair, how do you want us to raise questions? You know, I don't know whether to press the button or try to make a little noise over here that I'm over.
I see the button.
Okay.
The one I ignored is right there.
Mine was just a quick question. Okay, I was just wondering, the corporate, board advisors, will that just be a standing board, or will that be a rotating plan developed into that, or would they?
Top of 27 for 4 years.
Yeah, 4-year term.
4-year term, okay, all right.
Senator Washington.
Thank you. So are there two cores? There's a climate justice core and there, yeah, is that? Okay, so there's a climate justice core and then what's the other one?
So there's, currently, there already is a Chesapeake Conservation
Yes,
Corps.
okay, so yeah. And then there's also a Maryland Conservation Corps existing under DNR. Did we contemplate locating these projects there, or?
No, so the Maryland Conservation Corps is, it's a different sort of program. So versus the Chesapeake Conservation Corps is more like an AmeriCorps sort of program that, you know, you have organizations that sort of apply, say that we would like a core participant. And then, you know, the applicants sort of get placed within those various organizations. So they're not necessarily working for a state government unit versus the DNR Conservation Corps. I believe all of those participants are working with DNR. So it's just sort of a different model.
Yes, so the Maryland Conservation Corps, well, I would like to talk, because I actually did this work for about 6 years. So the Maryland Conservation Corps is an AmeriCorps model, and they do have relationships with local communities. So just in general, I think I just want to raise some issues just about that. Also, when I started at Parks and People Foundation, there were these two corps. So there was this one corps that was sort of a similar to what we currently have, the climate corps, and then there was the environmental justice corps, and then it was like, well, all the black kids were in the environmental justice corps, and the majority white were in the other one, and it's like, well, we're all working on cleaning the environment, so I consolidated both of them into one, and what happened was we sort of mixed up the different types of projects, so we had the opportunity where students that wouldn't typically work on environmental justice sometimes worked on environmental justice, and the students that only worked in the city had an opportunity to go out and work in state parks. So I think I just want to contemplate, how we might, create a larger core that may have different kinds of projects and promote, and not sort of result in sort of unintentionally segregating the core.
If I could briefly, and it's a very good, very important point. A couple things. The Chesapeake Conservation Corps, we passed about 10 or 12 years ago. It was actually Senate President Miller and Vicky Gruber. It's run by the trust. They take the applications, they place people, Chesapeake Bay Foundation, Eastern Shore this,
Right.
Whatever.
Right.
Now, I've asked a lot of questions because I wanted, and they have a board and they have a process. I believe I asked about the breakdown of people in it. And they take people for a year, young people for a year, up to 25. They pay them $12, $14 an hour. They make $20, $30, $40,000 for a year. And then they try to help place them in similar type work.
Yeah.
Now, the last I heard from the director, I think about 30% are minority residents of the state in terms of the Chesapeake
Yeah.
climate. Obviously, most of their work is around the bay or the tributaries. The concept I had here was to probably be, I don't want to say more urban, because there are going to be other poverty areas like Somerset County. And also to hire young people. And, you know, in my mind, it would be a majority, minority, black, brown people who normally wouldn't be there, could make $15 an hour, get placed in a nonprofit, a community association,
Right.
Morgan, whatever.
Yep.
And, but the idea of, at some point, because I asked about the very nature, do these 40 people ever see each other, for example?
Right.
And at least in the Chesapeake program, they bring them together like every quarter so they can network, get to know each other and say, look, I got a great placement. You should apply when you're done. And so they have a program, like an onboarding program, at least in the Chesapeake. And she was suggesting we could copy some of those models. So that's the genesis. The other thing I want to mention, the Senate President has a bill
Yes, he does. Yeah.
also on creating, consolidating, building, growing young youth corps to be constructive participants in building the state. So I haven't seen, I think it's primarily in B and T, we're a second. I don't know if somebody,
Yeah, I'm looking at
oh,
it.
it's in
Well,
Washington.
I'm looking at it, so, yeah.
It's tomorrow, and I think we're sending someone up or down for that.
No, we already got it. We already
Oh,
got
okay,
it.
we have second, okay. So that's happening at the same time. I just wanted to give the full range of what's
Yeah.
happening, and
Yeah.
they have some similar things, and I've talked to the Senate President. Do we put it in ours? Do we roll it into his? Does he
Yeah.
cut that out of his? Because I think what he's doing is great.
Yeah.
He obviously likes what I'm doing in this bill. So we want to build, 18 to 20, 24-year-olds who are not sure where they want to go, to give them a start at a modest, but with a directed kind of work for a year. And last year, when we passed the tree bill, and I know Senator Ellis had an amendment to try to make sure they utilized a lot of people from those communities. And I think these could converge. So in other words, some of these young people could be planting trees
Yeah.
in West Baltimore. So we want to integrate this and create a dynamic. So that's, not that it's a finished product, but that was sort of the context for it.
So, I mean, I guess, yes, I've attended, I'm very familiar with the Chesapeake Bay, and I've attended, I've spoken actually at their graduations, et cetera, and I've participated at the Maryland Conservation Corps, and in 2010, we actually had another corps. I guess my broader just questioning critique is that I do believe that residing this program in DNR, at least when it has the support, is a good thing rather than contracting it out, no offense to the trust. And I think that we could certainly, through DNR, worked, and again, when I was working, we worked very closely with DNR in the city of Baltimore City. We had a Baltimore City division. We also created a Prince George's division. There were different sort of sites across the state, but they were all part of what we called our Maryland Civic Justice Corps. and they did this type of work. So I would like, when I read through it, I just think we could do that model, and I do think that the state could do that. We could do it. We already have some of the infrastructure to do it. And the Senate President's is different because it's not just environmental, it's other types of projects. But that's, so I would like to see us just build out what we're already doing rather than creating something new. So that's.
Is that a very bland question? On page 26, line 17 through 21, just, what is that? It's saying that if you're a regulated lobbyist, you don't have to do certain things with that. I'm just curious what that is.
I will have to get back to you on
That's
that,
fine.
because
That's
that was boilerplate from the current Chesapeake Conservation Corps, so I don't know.
Yeah, that's sort of there are limitations on lobbyists being on boards, so I think this would replicate that language.
Or to
Yeah, and we,
pull it out. No, it's a good
Let's keep
question.
going.
Okay. Next section, which we'll probably take some time on, page 34. This is new language. This is the all-electric code language. So this is based on the recommendations of the Maryland Commission on Climate Change. Just to be clear up front, this section applies only to new construction, but this section is not, I think there's been some confusion about covered buildings and 24,000 square feet. This is not limited to 24,000 square feet. This is all buildings, all new construction. So it would require on or before January 1st, 2023, the Department of Labor must adopt, as part of the Maryland Building Performance Standards, 1, a requirement that new buildings meet all water and space heating demands without the use of fossil fuels, and 2, certain electric-ready standards. So this is on page 35, yep. So 1 is the all-electric requirement, all water and space heating needs, and 2 is electric-ready standards, so those would deal with installation of solar energy systems, installation of electric vehicle charging equipment, and building grid interaction. So not saying that, everything would have to have all those, but just that buildings would have to be constructed in a way that it could be installed at a later date. The section goes on to say that local jurisdictions are authorized to grant a variance from the electric-only requirements if the jurisdiction determines, in accordance with a cost-effectiveness test developed by the Department of Labor, that the incremental cost of constructing a particular building to comply with the all-electric requirements would be greater than the social cost of greenhouse gases that would be reduced by complying with the requirements. So that's page 35, lines 10 through 16.
April, clarifying. You just said the Department of Labor. I assume you meant you meant Department of Labor.
Department of Labor. So this is, we're in the public safety article right now. This is the building codes language. So the Building Codes Administration within the Department of Labor is responsible for adopting building codes for the state. So this would require them, as part of that process, so right now, the state basically operates under, they have adopted the international, what is it? The International something Construction Code, IECC. But this would require them to adopt modifications to that include these all-electric requirements.
Okay, so on line 13, the department means labor.
Correct.
And when we go back to 21, we're back to the Department of the Environment. Because that's what
Wait,
it says.
where?
Okay. Line 21.
On page,
Sorry. Page 35? I thought that's where we were. Line 13, page 35, line 13.
yeah, well, so this is for the purpose of calculating the social cost. So this is the Department of the Labor is still required to take all the actions, but when they're developing the cost effectiveness test, they must use either the social cost of carbon adopted by the Department of the Environment, or the social cost of carbon adopted by the EPA. Those are just sort of the two.
I'm sorry,
that
April, I'm
exist.
going to ask one more time, because now I feel like, bless you, I feel like I've heard three things. Page 35, line 13, developed by the department, you said labor.
Yep.
And then I heard you reinforce labor, and then you said, I thought now you just said that the cost effectiveness was through the Department of Environment. It's still
No,
labor.
No, when the Department of Labor is creating the cost effectiveness test, they have to it has to incorporate something called the social cost of carbon.
Okay.
That is set, we have a state social cost of carbon that is adopted by the Department of the Environment, or there's a federal one that is adopted by the EPA. Department of Labor could use either of those. So it's all Department of Labor, it's just they can either use the cost of carbon adopted by the state or the feds.
Thank you.
Yeah, building codes are run by the Department of Labor. That's why this section is under their purview.
The other thing that I will just note in this section is that if you go to top of page 36, lines 6 through 11, just reproducing some existing language, this is just to make it clear that under current law, local jurisdictions must implement and enforce the building performance standards adopted by the Department of Labor within 12 months. So having the Department of Labor adopt the standards by January 1st, 2023 means as a practical matter that those standards would be enforced by the jurisdictions no later than January 1st, 2024.
I'm sorry, I'm not trying to beat a dead horse here on the same thing. The Department of Labor has to create new measurements and all that if we're going to use the state Department of Labor. We're going to have a new department, a new governor, a new cabinet secretary who will have just been approved, just been nominated and considered. Is that a realistic timetable that they are then going to take office, put up the curtains, and figure out, promulgate regulations and standards? Mr.
That's a
Chairman?
question for the committee.
I think that's worth thinking about.
And
That
I
seems
will
really
say, I
fast.
think that the timeline that is in here was based on the Maryland Commission on Climate Change recommendations, because they had said that the all-electric code, they wanted to take effect in 2024. So in order for that to happen, Department of Labor would have to adopt by 2023. But it's a fair question.
There's reality. I don't think we want to set anyone up to fail.
Right. This might be a little more aggressive than the commission. I thought they had 24 and we had 23. I could be wrong on this. I will check.
Well, they said that the commission recommendations say that the all-electric standards should take effect 2024. So we put in the bill in order to make that happen,
okay.
that the Department of Labor would adopt them by 2023 so that they would take effect. Their different commission members have different interpretations of what they actually meant by 2024, but.
Okay. But the rest, and I just, again, not to be an advocate, the assertion or the policy of new construction being all electric was voted 22-2 by the full commission. 10 of the 12 agencies of this administration, the Hogan administration, voted in favor. Only MEA and somebody else voted no, but the Secretary of the Environment voted yes. And as I said yesterday more than once, the Vice President, who was co-chair of the commission of PEPCO, voted in support of going all electric. And I can show you the list. I've got the list in my office, that it was an overwhelming vote. So even if the date, and obviously, we're going to have discussion and amendments, but the policy itself going forward was virtually unanimous. I'm not sure, Senator Galley and then Senator Carrozza.
You began to touch on this. I just wanted to get this kind of clarified in my mind. We're talking about the social cost of greenhouse gases. So that's that's a definition from the Department of Labor. Is there a set thing that we can look at and say this is the actual definition of that? Or is that more subjective? I'm curious.
And that's where this language that Senator Kagan had brought up actually comes into play. So the social cost of carbon is set, we have a state social cost of carbon that's set by the Department of the Environment, and there is a federal one that is set by the EPA.
So we can read that somewhere, what that is?
Yes, yeah.
Cost of carbon. Awesome.
Okay, let's keep going.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Cruz, I apologize.
Thank you. So going back to the local jurisdictions on page 35. So you have this possible variance that a local jurisdiction may consider if they meet this test that is developed by the Labor Department that determines whether the incremental cost of constructing the building to comply with the requirements would be greater than the social cost of the greenhouse gases that would be reduced. So what is the social cost of carbon? How much is it? Like, I mean, if you're at the local level and you're trying to apply a test that the Department of Labor came up with that I guess also has to meet the calculations that MDE has come up with, I'm just trying to understand how you come up with the social cost.
So social cost of carbon, and I just looked it up, it's currently, at least federal, set at $51 a ton. So, and again, this bill does not go into specifics about what that cost, what that cost effectiveness test would be. But the basic idea is that if it's going to cost you, if the cost to the builder of doing all electric versus a mixed fuel building would exceed, whatever reduction, the value of the reduction of greenhouse gases, then under a cost effectiveness test, they would be able to do it. They would be able to do the mixed fuel. So you'd be looking at incremental cost to the builder, let's say, sorry, I'll give an example. So let's say it's going to cost a builder $10,000 more to do an all-electric building versus a mixed fuel building. But the cost, based off of the social cost of carbon of the emissions that would be reduced over the lifetime of that building is only $5,000. Well, then the cost to them is greater than the benefit of that reduction. So under this cost effectiveness test, they'd be allowed to go forward. That's, in theory, the way something like that would work.
Okay.
Now, the models that the consultant for the Department of the Environment showed, they showed all going forward would be cheaper anyway. But if you had the all-electric versus building it the old way, if the cost of the old way plus the social cost was lower or higher?
The cost.
If the cost of electric was more than what would have been the traditional cost of building plus the social cost, the county can give you a variance. So there's a safety valve, so no one can get shafted on the cost of building the new construction.
It's a technical word.
Right. That's on page 39. Speaking of shafts.
Mr. Chair,
Yep.
or council,
Do you know of any other place that has that implemented that we could look at how they're doing it?
I do not.
I think New York City.
New York City, okay.
There could be others, but I'm pretty sure New York City. Is that right? Any other people in the audience? No?
For all electric?
Didn't New York adopt new building codes for new construction?
We can't hear them.
Yeah, tell us who you are and come to the mic.
Hi, I'm Victoria. I'm with Chesapeake Climate Action Network, Victoria Venable. And New York City has implemented an all-electric new construction code. Denver has started the plan. I don't remember off the top of my head the timeline. And then a couple of states have done incentives for all-electric new construction that I can also provide some information for. Some, like an alternative compliance process, or?
Effectiveness versus the social cost.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly how they created the variance in New York City, but I can look it up and send it around if that's
Okay,
helpful.
that'd be interesting.
You're welcome. Stand, John.
Okay, so page 37, this is dealing with the Empower program. Again, this section is identical to last year's. It increases the energy savings that electric companies must achieve in fiscal years 2024 and thereafter. There is additional uncodified language, which I believe was actually added to the to last year's House bill in the House on page 52, lines 8 through 16, that essentially allows the Public Service Commission to continue with ongoing planning processes related to Empower because they are already sort of in the process of looking at how to get these types of reductions going forward.
If you could humor me, what does the Empower do again? I see it lowering or increasing standards. How does that play out? Is that just with, when you buy it, they have to have the equipments like that, or is it within your home, or?
Yeah, so Empower it's a program, it requires the electric companies to sort of increase efficiency. It's the program, so I don't know if you've ever done like BGE will like give you will buy back your old sort of inefficient fridge, or they'll do weatherization projects. That's all Empower. So it requires the electric company to sort of offer programs a lot that achieve energy efficiency.
It had been set at 2%. This phase it up to 2.75.
Okay, so page 37, line 22, these are changes to Maryland's high-performance building program. This section, again, is nearly identical to last year's bill. This section only applies to new publicly funded buildings. So currently, the Maryland High Performance Building Program applies to 1, capital projects that are funded solely with state funds, 2, community college capital projects that receive any amount of state funds, and 3, new public school buildings that receive state school construction funds. So again, I'm talking about the current program right now because there was some confusion about this last year. Currently, all of those buildings who are subject to these program requirements must be LEED Silver or equivalent, essentially.
Or better.
Yes, or better, yes. But they must be at least LEED Silver or equivalent. So the bill keeps that baseline requirement of being LEED Silver or equivalent or better, with a minor change, which I'll get into that in just a second. But it also requires that buildings subject to this program be LEED Net Zero or equivalent. So LEED Silver has to do with, all sorts of conservation stuff, water use, et cetera. But this would say on top of that, new buildings subject to these requirements would also have to be net zero. So that's essentially like what we saw with the schools that we visited this interim, where they are producing as much energy on site as they consume over a year. The bill, but other changes to the existing program, it lowers the bar a little bit for public school and public safety buildings that have difficulty meeting the LEED Silver requirements because of their location. That's page 37, lines 29 through 32. It says that those buildings, they wouldn't have to be LEED Silver, they could just be LEED certified, which is sort of the next kind of rung down in the LEED categories. It also expands coverage for capital projects to include capital projects for which at least 25% of project cost are funded with state funds. So that's page 38, lines 31 through 32. So it's bringing more capital projects under the auspices of this program. Finally, it also eliminates provisions that essentially right now allow schools to self-certify rather than to obtain third-party certification. So Senator Heddleman also had a bill on this, both this year and in previous years. So again, all of that is pretty much what was in the bill the Climate Solutions bill last year. So now we're going to jump back. So that's generally what this is doing. And we're going to jump back to the beginning of the bill, that education section that I said we're going to skip over. We have special provisions for schools, because remember, again, schools are in general held to the standards of the high performance building program, which the bill modifies to say also includes net zero. Well, page 8 says that in general, schools would not be required to be net zero. So they'd still have to meet the other high performance building program requirements, LEED Silver or above, or LEED certified if they're not in a convenient location. However, subject to the availability of funding from the Net Zero School Grant Fund, at least one of the schools constructed in each jurisdiction from July 1st, 2023 through June 30th, 2033 must be net zero. Yeah,
Tell me what page you're on.
so this is on page 8.
Page 8. You mean 38?
Nope.
We skipped a section early about schools, so we're back on page 8.
Okay.
Yeah, because it doesn't make sense to discuss the schools until you've discussed the general changes to the high performance building program.
Okay, that's why I was lost, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Question? So I see on page 8, lines 14 through 18, and I'm going to be devil's advocate against my own jurisdiction, and it just seems that at least one of the schools, shouldn't there be some population parameters so that larger jurisdictions should be required to do more than one? Because I don't think Garrett County should do one, and then Montgomery County should do one. That seems unfair, actually.
Let me jump in, because should you talk about the fund? Did you mention the fund?
Want to wait?
Put a hold for about 30 seconds on that.
of course.
Piece of this is essentially schools are only required to do this if there is available funding. And so the bill says that the Interagency School Construction Commission, they must waive the requirement if A, the construction of a net zero school is impractical because of spatial limitations, or if 2, when taking into consideration the availability of state cost share funds and grants from a new net zero school grant program that we're setting up in this bill, the cost of the local jurisdiction would exceed the cost of constructing a traditional high-performance school building. This fund is set up later in the bill, page 44, but it essentially provides grants up to $3 million per school, and it's funded with a mandatory appropriation of $12 million per fiscal year. So I imagine the chair is about to say he's concerned about funding limitations.
So how this works, because people are concerned about marginal cost. At Holabird, they said $3 million was a marginal cost. At Wild Lake, they said it was probably 5 or 5+, but they also acknowledged it was a bigger school, and they didn't start from ground zero. They said they didn't start from a pure beginning. They used another template, which cost them money. So using the $3 million as a marginal cost, I set up a fund of $12 million annually. That will pay for 4 schools. After 4 schools, somebody can do it on their own, but the state is not going to pay the difference. So over 3 years, that'll get us 12 schools, hopefully spread around, because not everyone's going to build one of these every year. My hope is after 3 years, when we have 12 of these, and school systems have gotten out of their comfort zone and have built one, it'll be easier building 2 and 3, and the cost also will go down. So I didn't have a blank check from budget and tax. I came up with 12 million a year, and we already had another fund of 5 million. So this will cost us, but I think putting money where our values are is important, and I've been in discussion with budget and tax. So the idea is we'll cover the marginal cost up to 4 a year. Every school system, Garrett County is not building a school every year. Somerset County is not building a school every year. If we're building 8 or 9 in Prince George's, although they're already in the pathway, hopefully next year, if they pull permit on another one, they'll apply for this money. So that's what it does.
And I think this is just putting it on the table for conversation or reflection another time. High school, middle school, elementary school, Papa Bear, Mama Bear, Baby Bear, different costs, different sizes. So I don't know if you want to be prescriptive, but certainly the money goes further if it's a smaller school, but it has a bigger impact if it's a larger school. So I think that's probably worth reflecting on. And then, as you said, you just said in Prince George's County, so the renovation, rather than a totally new school in a growing area, probably different costs on those too. But again, we can talk about that another time, but I do think that those all have impacts.
Yeah. Rather than getting too in the weeds, I think the school system can choose. If they're going to build, if they're thinking 3 million will be the difference, and the 3 million was the difference in a middle school, a K to 8 school, we'll let them decide. I don't want to start saying 5 and 2 and 1. We don't know what the needs of the schools are in Anne Arundel or Dorchester or Charles. We just want to get them out of their comfort zone and doing it. They can do it in East Baltimore. They can do it in Columbia. We want more counties to do it and use it as an educational thing like they did in Holabird.
Question for Vice Chair. You said some terms I didn't understand. Papa something and Mama. So.
3 bears analogy,
Oh,
a Papa Bear, a
thanks.
Mama Bear, and a Baby Bear size of school.
Okay, got it.
So
Okay, it's getting
was
kind
very-
of late.
It was
so
very technical.
I thought I missed
totally get it.
something. Yeah.
No,
That's
no,
actually now used in a toilet paper commercial, a popular toilet, right? People have seen that?
I haven't.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've cut back, but now we're cutting back forward. Page 40.
We're getting there.
We're getting towards the end here. This is lines 18 through, or page 40, line 18 through page 41, line 4. This is new language. It requires each primary procurement unit of the state to ensure that on or before January 1st, 2030, at least 75% of the electricity supply procured for use in state facilities under that unit's control is derived from specified low-carbon renewable energy sources. So those sources, you can see, are on the bottom of page 40. Just note that this could be through the purchase of renewable energy credits. It's not, through necessarily establishing ocean energy at state buildings. Page 41, line 19 through page 43, line 28. This establishes requirements related to the purchase of zero-emission passenger cars and light-duty vehicles for the state fleet. This is very similar to provisions from last year's bill that were dealing with state buses. So the operative lines that you want to probably look at, though, are the goals, which are all on page 42. So lines 14 through line 28 on page 42, that's dealing with passenger cars. And then page 42, line 29 through 43, line 6, that's the light-duty vehicles. The section does not apply, this is basically the same language we had for the buses last year, page 42, lines 8 through 13. Does not apply to the purchase of vehicles that have special performance requirements necessary for the protection and welfare of the public, or to vehicles acquired by the Department of Transportation or the Maryland Transit Administration that will be used to provide paratransit services.
And again, this is going to be an amendment coming, but we're taking out the subject to availability of funding. This will be another mandate. They got to do it. They can't think about it. They got to do it. Keep going.
Okay. Page 45, line 10, onwards, this is also new. It establishes a climate transition and clean energy hub in the Maryland Energy Administration to serve as a clearinghouse for information on advanced technology and architectural solutions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the building sector. So the hub is tasked with providing technical assistance to public and private entities to comply with building-related provisions essentially in the bill. I will note that there is uncodified language on page 52, lines 1 through 7, that requires one additional PIN, so one additional personnel position to be created in the Maryland Energy Administration to serve as coordinator of the hub, but otherwise expresses the intent that the Maryland Energy Administration carry out the responsibilities of the hub with existing resources.
And just for intent, it is to have a clearinghouse for resources. So in other words, if they need architects to do net zero, or they need expertise, the hub would be a new center, and hopefully over the years it'll grow, but we wanted to get it started to have a central location. Thank you.
Next provision on page 46, these are in the property tax provisions. So this again is identical to what was in the bill last year. Essentially exempts these community solar projects that serve at least 51% of kilowatt hour output to lower moderate income customers, exempt them from property tax.
Which is counties, not state.
Yeah, it's county and the municipality.
Yeah.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
No, that's an impact on counties.
Small impact.
Yeah,
Can you
it's.
say more about that, please?
It's in
I'm
the
sorry, I
fiscal note,
should have been
44,000.
speaking into the mic. I was asking about the implications for our 24 counties.
Yeah. I think there's only 2 counties that are impacted according to the fiscal note because of the way the projects are defined right now.
Do you want to be at the mic, Ian? Sorry, put him on camera.
I'm on camera. I think that if you look in the fiscal note, I think there were only 2 projects that were identified as, fitting the criteria here. And I think that under PSC regs, there's limits on the number that could fit that category as well.
Okay,
So, yeah, it was measured in the tens of thousands of dollars.
okay. Yeah, while I still have the mic, I can just say that there are a lot of places, I suspect that there would be a lot of places that would be interested in trying to build community solar. So the fiscal note, if it acknowledges what's happening now, I hope that this bill and that the climate crisis will cause more communities to want to go solar. I think it's worth our putting a pin in that for the impact on our locals.
Yeah, as you said, there are limitations actually on the amount of these community solar projects that can be developed. And that was something that the Montgomery County, the county executives, thank you, long day, pointed out in his testimony is that right now, community solar in general is limited, I think it's 2 megawatts
By the Public Service Commission.
by the Public Service, that's in state law.
Okay.
But, so this is a narrow slice of that. It's the community solar that serves low-income households primarily, low and moderate income households. Okay, so now we're on to the final part of the bill. This is a big part, though. This is new. So this is beginning at bottom of page 46, line 24 onwards. So this is the building emission standards. So just a note, we skipped over definitions for this section appear on page 23 of the bill. It's drafted a little funnily because parts of the law that I'm about to talk about, or the provisions I'm about to talk about, sunset, so they have to go to a different part of the bill. But this is the so-called retrofit section that was discussed at length, I think, during the bill hearing. So this is the section that deals with existing commercial and multifamily residential buildings of 25,000 square feet or more. Those are defined as covered buildings. It does not apply to historic properties or to public school buildings. So this section would require the Department of the Environment to establish building emission standards for covered buildings that achieve, for state-owned buildings, a 50% reduction in net greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and net zero emissions by 2035. And for all other covered buildings, 20% net reduction by 2030 and a 40% net reduction by 2035, and then net zero by 2040. So that language specifically, we're on page 47, lines 1 through 10. So I should note that the net zero goal for non-state buildings is set to sunset on December 31st, 2029. So that would be before even the first sort of reduction goal takes effect. The net zero emissions standard for non-state covered buildings. So just essentially, if you're looking at page 47, line 10 goes away. December 31st, 2029, unless extended. Sure.
Sorry, quick. You said that schools and historic buildings are exempted from the definition of covered buildings. Would you mind just flagging where that is? I'm not finding it.
So that would be page 23.
Oh, okay, I'm on
Right, so
47
this is,
still.
again, yeah, the definitions are in a different part of the bill.
Okay.
So covered building, defined starting on page 23,
Got it.
line 29, but then does not include page 24, lines 1 through
Got
3.
it. Yep,
or
yep,
4.
yep. Thank you.
So just to clarify the intent of this section and
Okay, sorry, I'll hold.
clarify the intent of this section a little bit, and there has, I think, already been discussion about the need, if this section is to go forward, to tighten it up the language a little bit and clarify what we're talking about here. The section is not intended to say that every covered building has to achieve 20% reductions on its own emissions by 2030 and 40% on its own emissions by 2035. Essentially, what this would do is require the Department of the Environment to set up something that they're often called in other contexts BEPS, Building Emission Performance Standards. But what they do essentially is they say, all right, they go by sort of categories of building use and size of buildings and say, all right, if our goal is to achieve 20% reductions in overall emissions, then the maximum emissions that a grocery store of X many feet should be putting out is however many tons of carbon per year. So they establish that standard. If you as a business have already taken a lot of steps to improve your efficiency and you're already below that standard, you don't have to do anything. However, if you're a less efficient business, you haven't retrofitted in a while, and you're above that standard, you would either have to take steps to retrofit to meet that standard, or you would have to pay typically an alternative compliance fee. So that's generally the way that this section is operating. The Department of the Environment sets standards, buildings have to meet that standard or do some sort of alternative compliance. The other piece of this is starting on page 49, lines 10 through page 51, line 27, establishes a building energy implementation task force to develop a plan for funding the retrofit of covered buildings. And that plan would be due December 1st, 2023. Because again, the testimony around this and the concern in general around this is that buildings would need financial assistance to sort of meet whatever goals the Department of the Environment is setting.
Here's the context. Again, I'm not saying this to sell it. Even if we take care of new construction, 5 years or 10 years from now, that might be 3, 5, 7% of the building stock. So if we want to start changing and reducing greenhouse gases in the state, we have to address existing stock, commercial, multifamily, residential, individual residential. What this calls for is over the next 18 or 25 years, we have to start having the existing stock make changes, whether it's putting on solar, whether when they renovate a commercial building, they might change their furnaces to heat pumps, whatever they use, we don't tell them how to do it, that they will have to start reducing their emissions gradually over the next 18 or 20 years. That being said, if you're a developer or you own a big building and you're putting $10 million into renovating your building, the question becomes, can you renovate it in such a way that reduces your emissions, and what will that cost be? So what this contemplates is they're going to have to make reductions over the next period of time. We set up a task force of all the stakeholders, private sector, businesses, government, to look at what is a reasonable investment. So in other words, if I invest $10 million and I get that money back from savings from my energy bills in 8 years, and then I start making money, that ain't so bad. If for someone to do this, they don't get a return on their investment, should there be state tax credits, incentives, bond support, whatever? So this task force is to come up with what is reasonable to help encourage, ensure that all of these existing buildings begin to get on this pathway to reduce their emissions. So that's the framework, whether people like it or not. I mean, that's what we came up with. That's what the mitigation work group they didn't come up with exactly the same, but, so that's what it does. Vice Chair.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
So sorry. Nope, go ahead.
Okay.
That's gonna be a lot of jobs.
That's the end.
Okay.
That's the end of.
Less than 2 hours. We started at 12 after 4, so, huh? You can go home.
Chair's buying dinner.
Look, look, we received obviously lots of amendments, recommendations from the testimony. I think some are good, some may or may not be. You can suggest some of those next week. I'm actually in conversation with some of the people who had serious conversations and concerns to see if we can get to yes. There are some who will never support this because it's probably going to hurt the bottom line. So we want to get it to where we can. And again, Senator Gallion last week raised, what about the House? They have a lot of the same components, but we don't know what they're going to do with it over there. So, but I want to give you an example. They call for a 62%, they call for a 60% reduction by 2032. We call it by 2030. So, I mean, there are some differences, and there will continue to be differences. So we'll amend it as we see fit, send it to the floor, and they'll amend it. It'll go to the House, and they'll do what they do, and they'll pass over their product. Any other questions before we?
Last time I think, we had the bill.
Annually. So, look, we're still trying to add up whether it's 10 million, 20 million, 26 million, but they believe, and the Senate President thinks it's important, so it's going to be in the general fund, very clear. No C fund, no Bay Restoration Fund, so we're not going to have those issues. Thank you for raising that, Senator.
It does go to budget and tax for
Oh, yeah,
secretary.
Budget and Tax has a second on this. So when we're done voting at the end of next week, they will then get it. But they're aware of the bill and the costs.
Knowing this is going to be a process, if it's possible and people don't mind, if we could see some of the amendments in advance so we have a little time to look at them opposed to just during the working, when we're voting on it, it give us just a little, so we could fit it in there and understand it a little better. Now, if there's some they don't want to share, it's fine, but the ones that people are willing to.
I am going to try to go through what was proposed from people who want to see the bill work, not from the antagonists. And I'll try to put them together in a sponsor amendment package, and we'll try to get it to you before the voting. Yes, Senator.
Just process question. Can you remind me the dates when we're going to go through the amendments and then vote? They're both next week, but.
It's all going to be one. In other words, we'll have a markup where we'll entertain amendments, debate and vote on the amendments, and then vote on the bill.
And which day of the week is that?
That'll be either Friday or Thursday, or maybe we'll start Friday and finish Friday. Oh, we might start Thursday at evening, afternoon, and finish on Friday.
Overnight, bring your jammies.
Right, right. Who's ever still awake? So it'll be Thursday and or Friday. Originally, we had projected a faster time frame, but we need time on this.